Hi, and welcome to OTH Sports View. I'm Chuck Pollock, Times Herald sports editor, and with me, on my right, Jeff Madigan, who covers the women's basketball team for the Times Herald, and on my left, JP Butler in his 9th season covering the men. Interestingly, a week ago, it was an all-winning week for both St. Bonaventure teams. This past week, it was a losing record for both, but it seems that the teams are taking opposite directions, and we'll talk about that first with Jeff. Jeff, when last we talked, there was a nice win over Stony Brook, reason for Bona women's fans to be encouraged. But you suspected from the time you took the beat, this is a rebuilding year, and that message has been re-delivered, first by Eastern Michigan and then by Toledo.
Well, two very good MAC opponents that they played this past weekend, and yeah, they did lose both, and they lost both by 25 and 24 or something like that points. And it wasn't a great road trip last week for the Bona women. They come back, they'll get Albany on Sunday at 4-6. But, I mean, like I said, I don't think anybody pegged this team to repeat what it did last year. I mean, the year after they went to the NCAA tournament the last time, they were 10-19 the following season. So it looks like that's about the benchmark where this team is probably going to go. And then they got a great matchup against a pretty good Albany team coming in here on Sunday.
I'm wondering, clearly only one starter returned. So there was a lot of change there, but is there a specific reason you see why they've struggled the last two games particularly?
Well, they're having trouble scoring the ball would be the number one reason, and then the other reason would be that they're having trouble defending as well. I mean, they allowed Eastern Michigan, a team that was scoring in the 60s, to score 75, and to their credit, they allowed a team in Toledo, who usually scores in the 80s, to 74. So maybe you can look at it as a minor victory. But right now, the team is built on defense, and when it's not defending well, there's going to be a lot of problems. And if you give it up 75 points a game, your likelihood of winning that game is not very good.
We know, Jeff, that when Jesse Fleming took over from Jim Crowley, this is going to be a rebuilding year,
right,
even if it was Jim Crowley coaching.
Probably.
But the reality comes when you realize, yeah, this really is a rebuilding year. Do you think that maybe in some sort of subliminal way it's wearing on Jesse a little bit?
See, I don't think so. I mean, he might be frustrated with how the offense is playing or frustrated with how the defense is playing, but in terms of like expressing it publicly, I don't think he's doing it in a sense where he's like getting more and more frustrated at some of the questions that are being asked, or questions about how his program is being run. I mean, we're leaving that to the folks in Orchard Park to do that. But it's just in terms of, he knew it was going to be a rebuilding year. He's not looking at it in terms of wins and losses at all.
Final question, and maybe this is kind of an extrapolation that's difficult for you to make, but Eastern Michigan and Toledo are two good programs.
Right.
Maybe fashioning that ahead a little bit, how would you think that they would compare with the teams that are upcoming once the conference season starts?
Well, Toledo, Jesse Fleming told me that Toledo would probably be top 4 or 5 in the A10, and the Bonnies, they lost to that team by 24. Now Toledo is 4-0 against the A10, so and there's going to be some teams in the A10 this year, and hopefully St. Bonaventure isn't one of them that won't get 4 A10 wins all season when they play 18 league games, or 16 league games rather. But that's really good. Toledo was a really good team. They pressured the ball. They turned you over. They could shoot the ball very much like the UNC Wilmington team that the Bona men played, that you'll talk about here in a few minutes. But Albany's coming in here on Sunday. That's a really good team. They went to the NCAA tournament last year. They have a new coach and did lose their leading scorer. Still a very good team. They're 6-5. And then next Wednesday is the University at Buffalo. The Bonnies are going up there. UB right now, last I checked, they're undefeated. They're 8-0. They went to the tournament last year and looked primed to win the MAC conference this year for a second straight season. And then after that, then conference play starts. You get Rhode Island here on the 28th, and then they're at George Mason on the 31st. Those are two lesser teams in the A10, so maybe the Bonnies could take advantage of that. You want to win your home games for sure, and I think they can get Rhode Island here, but that remains to be seen. They're 4-6 right now, and hopefully they're not going into January, into the thick of conference play at 4-8, and extend that to 4-10 or anything of that like that.
Well, as we head down toward the end of the non-conference season for the women, the road is still pretty tough.
Yeah.
And the men have their own issues as well, and we'll talk about them next. JP, for the men this week was only one game, and what a game it was. The result was disappointing to Bona fans and maybe come season's end, but we were talking about the top games in the history of the RC, and for the next half century, I'd like to nominate that one to make it.
You're right, and I think we said right at the end of the game there where, because we were running our last installment of our top 50 men's games the next day, and I said, is it too late to go back and readjust that last group to put this game in there, because it really was a great game, just a back and forth game between two really good teams that, I think kind of obviously had to come down to pretty much the last, play of the game.
Right.
And, for me, it was obviously a tough loss. It wasn't a bad loss in a sense that, it came to a bad team. UNC Wilmington's actually a very good team. They're now in the top 60 in the KenPom rankings. They were, they'd received a top 25 vote going into that game. This is a team that made the NCAA tournament last season, nearly knocked off Duke, and will very likely be there again this year, through the Colonial Athletic Association. So it wasn't a bad loss, but what it was, again, is just kind of a missed opportunity. And here we are, again, if we're going to look at this team in the non-conference in the middle of December with so much basketball left to be played, as putting the NCAA onus on them, then this was a really tough loss to have, because this was their last opportunity at that nice signature non-conference win going into the season. We saw last year that, they did what they did, probably should have made it anyway, but one of the reasons the committee had of leaving them out was that they didn't beat anybody. They didn't have, a real nice non-conference win to show for it. And now they're in a position here where, after losing to UNC Wilmington, which could have been that nice top 50 win at the end of the season, now they'll probably be hanging their hat on either Buffalo or Siena, 2 home wins against teams that are hovering around the top 100 in the KenPom rankings right now, but I suspect will probably be on the outside at season's end. And so, now it's a tough thing where can you really hang your hat on, your best non-conference win being over, number 115 Buffalo. And I'm not sure if that's, going to get it done, but that's just kind of what it is if that's how we're looking at this team this early. And some people are, and some I think are more willing to say, okay, let's see how things play out before we just say that they lost everything, by losing on Saturday.
But the interesting aspect of that is, lost to Florida on a neutral court, lost to Arkansas Little Rock neutral court, lost to UNCW here, all close, but all wins that would have been terrific for their view nationally, and instead they come up short, and now all of a sudden you're reaching back to UB and Siena, and that's not what you want.
Well, and that's the thing, given what they have left here, they have 3 sub-200 teams left in Army, Canisius, Niagara. Odds are they're probably going to go 9-3, which I think anybody in any other instance would probably take going into conference play. But the 3 losses were those 3 chances they had to get, kind of a good, non-conference victory going into the season. The first 2, I think, were a little more understandable given that they were away from the Riley Center. We talked about it. Nobody's going to expect this team to go into what was on the cusp of being a nationally ranked Florida team and winning on the road. Losing to an 8-2 Arkansas Little Rock team on a neutral floor, to me, is nothing that's really damaging. But the one that I guess was maybe a little more expected was the UNCW game, because it was here, because they knew what was on the line. Everybody knew what the stakes were. It was being talked about as, the biggest non-conference game in years under, Schmidt, and I agree. It was, and that was really a game that, could have been helpful down the road, could have really given them some momentum going into conference play, because if they win that and then they take care of business in these last 3 games, now all of a sudden they got a 9-game winning streak going into conference play, and it's on, at that point. And now there's just a little bit more regrouping to be done here.
Normally when you buy a game, that's code for you buy a win. That was quite an opponent to pay to come into the Riley Center. It was an incredible game, but you kind of think when you buy a game, you're going to come out with a W.
Yeah, I mean, I think in this sense, that's strictly just because of the conference that UNCW is coming from.
Right.
It's not the greatest conference. And I'm not sure yet at this point. I don't think there will be a return trip made for this game. And this was one that really worked out well because they knew what they were getting in UNCW. And to be able to play it at home for them was the perfect chance here. UNCW, as we said, I mean, they're now 8-1, and they've got to be a pretty heavy favorite, I would imagine, in their league again this year. We saw they had 5 guys on the floor that could score at all times, led by that Denzel Ingram, who just hit some amazingly tough shots, including the one just at the end of the game. And I think it was interesting because last year I think we were a little spoiled because last year Bona had won so many of those close games. That was the year where the bounce of the ball just seemed to go their way all the time. And when we talk about the buzzer beater, Jalen Adams buzzer beater against St. Louis, that big shot he hit at the end of the road Dayton game to pull off that massive victory, and all the way to the UMass game at the end of the season where Bona had taken the lead and then UMass made a 3 at the buzzer, and then it was waved off because it was released just before. I mean, everything was going their way, and you get to and even this year, the UB comes down to the end, they win it. Siena comes down to the end, they win it. It almost seemed as if it was just their, destiny that they were going to do it again, and it looked like they might. Adams goes down, and of course they're down 2. Not only does he get the 2, but he gets fouled to give Bona the lead. You're thinking, here we go again. They're going to do this again. Yeah. But there was a little bit too much time on the clock, I guess, for a team that was just certainly, at least on this day, they're equal and better in that last moment.
Final thought: this weekend, Saturday afternoon to be specific, the Bonnies in effect play their version of the Browns, the winless Browns, who the Bills will meet on Sunday.
Right.
You can't be going to a neutral court in Buffalo and lose to Niagara.
Right. Now, the 3 more games in the non-conference season, as I said, all 3 are against sub 200 teams in the Ken Palm ranking. So really, they're going from playing the second best team they'll play in the non-conference, UNCW, the first being Florida, to now playing the lowest ranked team that they'll play in the non-conference, which is Niagara. Yeah, actually, either Niagara or Army at this point. So now these games just become a matter of taking care of business. They'll be the heavy favorites in all 3 games, no matter where they're played. But then 2 of them are back in the Riley Center anyway, so that even more so. And I think they will, because we've seen that this team, has been pretty good, and especially in these games that they definitely should win. We saw down in Texas against Central Michigan and Pepperdine, they blew those two teams out. So I suspect that they will. They'll go into conference play 9-3, and then we'll see what happens in terms of can they get on a little bit of a run, the way they did last year. And to me, let's see what happens there first. Last year was the first 4 non-conference games. They won all 4. They were in first place in the A10 at 4-0, and it was really at that point that people thought, okay, maybe they're onto something here. Yeah. To me, let's get to that point. They're going to start with UMass on the road. That's going to be a really tough game to start. UMass is already better than they were predicted to be this year. We thought it was going to be more of a rebuilding year there, but they've been pretty good. That'll be the first test right there. They win that game, and they start off with a road win in the A10. Then we can get closer to that point of saying, okay, let's see where they're at. But to me, doing this in November, doing this in December is, that was really tough, putting that onus on them. But if we think that they can be in that conversation again, and they think that they can be in that conversation again, they said in the preseason, we think we can be that good again, then yeah, people are going to be talking about, what you need to do even now. And, Saturday was kind of a big hit to that.
We'll be back next week with another edition of OTH Sports View.